Happy Hump Day and welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is time for the first Ohio State press conference of training camp. Yeah, practice starts on Thursday, but we kick it off one day early. Just a little appetizer with Ryan Day and the Ohio State quarterback unit. What could we possibly have to ask those people, you ask? Well, you've come to the right place because it's time. We're getting back in. It's not the normal day, but questions that are on Bill Landis's mind have returned to the Podcast Daily. I can't wait. So now I get to find out how we're going to be informed by the things that are on his mind. That's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. Bill, where will you begin?
I think with just like a how you doing. I think I'm just going to say, hey, how you doing? Hey, Ryan, how you doing? I don't like that I don't know what your questions are. At the time that we're recording this, they have not yet been published at ohiostate.rivals.com.
Wait. Don't tell people that we're not recording this on Wednesday morning.
It is 4:30 in the morning on Wednesday. We're raring to go as Ohio State gets ready for camp. No, because I like to know what's on your mind as well, and I think that people do. They can of course find those questions there, but I think they'd like to hear them here as well. So I hope you bring those to the table. Yeah, I mean, I think we've not like talked a lot about quarterbacks. I think as you mentioned on the daily on Tuesday morning, we were just sort of like waiting to actually talk to them. But there's a lot to get into with that position group. I think, for Ryan Day specifically, like I don't know how to actually get at this or maybe even what he'd say, but the fact that he sat at Big Ten Media Days and said like this is a close competition, I would like to know a little bit more about what that means. And is it just that they missed what he thought was a pretty important data point because Devin Brown couldn't play in the spring game? Or did they like go into that spring game thinking that Kyle McCord and Devin Brown were neck and neck and then came out of it thinking they were neck and neck, even though Kyle could play and Devin couldn't, and then has that sustained throughout the summer months here as we get ready for camp? Because I and you, and I think a lot of people would probably assume based on a lot of things that Kyle would at least have a little bit of a lead. Not that he's run away with it, not that he's won the job already, but that was an inevitability on some level that it was going to happen. And Ryan Day at least left the door open a little bit that maybe that's not the case. I don't know how to read that. So there's a bunch of different ways to get at like what's up with the quarterbacks, but I think what does close mean and how does that kind of paint this competition as it gets going again? And then like, I guess timeline and stuff like that. I don't know. There was enough said at Big Ten Media Days that I wanted to like pull back just a little bit and maybe not just assume that it's all the way over as camp opens.
Yeah, I remember it was with the Justin Fields situation, and that summer the buzzword was separation. And we'll hear that occasionally still brought up from Ryan Day. There's got to be someone who clearly emerges, someone who has separated. And spring practices are just a different beast. I don't think that it's really possible to find that separation, that emergence when you're balancing reps and you're working on fundamentals. You're not necessarily putting in game plan things and how well that works, or working against, scrimmages that are going to be far more competitive with ones-on-ones in August. And so once you get one of those, like 10 days into camp, that may be a lot more clear. That has tended to happen. Now, we were talking about Heisman Trophy finalists and Justin Fields and CJ Stroud and really generational prospects. Is Kyle McCord ready to take up that mantle, and will he be able to author the same kind of season, or Devin Brown, if that's the way you want to look at it? But those questions are almost separate. Like, is your starter going to be capable of being a first-round draft pick? You don't really know that in a spring practice. You don't know that from one game against a MAC opponent. So, since I think that Kyle McCord is going to win the job, that tends to be where my focus goes. Is he capable of doing the things that made Justin Fields, CJ Stroud, Dwayne Haskins? Is there a special trait for Kyle McCord that will allow him to compete for a Heisman Trophy and a national championship? I thought there were encouraging signs in spring, but again, that's barely scratching the surface of the responsibility. So there are things about the way that the battle will be handled that I think will be interesting to see how Day talks about reps and those things. But as I go into, Thursday morning, I think it's more about how high is the ceiling for Kyle McCord and how good of an idea will we have by September 2nd.
Ryan Day said something else that kind of got my antennas up a little bit at media days, and I suppose like you can follow up on stuff there, but Frank, I don't feel like it's a tremendous venue for that kind of stuff. Like I just think you get at more good information in the settings like we're going to have on Wednesday afternoon and stuff after practice. So I didn't follow up with it then, but he said something to the effect of like Kyle, this is what Kyle has stuck around for, alluding to the fact that he could have left. Not that he was ever thinking about it, but that like given the current climate of quarterbacks, it's certainly out there and everyone understands that. And he said like this is what Kyle stuck around for, to have the chance to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. And I wonder how much, if at all, that plays into Ryan Day's decision making. And I suppose that gets to the topic of like loyalty and maybe for some people they don't want to hear that. Just play the best player. That they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can lead to the same guy. But it's no small thing. I think that Kyle McCord, 5-star prospect, was willing to sit here for 2 years behind CJ Stroud when he undoubtedly had an opportunity to go elsewhere and play earlier. And when you pile his talent on top of that, which we all think he has, I think we all think he's going to be an NFL quarterback. I do wonder how that plays into things. And I would like to ask Ryan Day that. I would hope that maybe he would be somewhat introspective on the topic, because I think given this day and age of quarterback roster management, you almost have to be both within the buildings and publicly. You have to massage those things. So I just found it interesting that he went out of his way to mention that, when the question didn't necessarily lead him there, but he made sure to make the point, like, listen, like Kyle has stuck around here for a reason. And that was not necessarily like confirmation that he's leaning that way for me, but it was a little bit of a nugget that I felt like, oh, that's like another layer to this that maybe I hadn't really considered all that much. Of course, Kyle has been here longer. We all know that, but how much does Ryan Day actually weigh that longevity in terms of, or from the perspective of, this guy could have gone elsewhere at any point leading up to this point?
What did you think of the frequent mentions of Lincoln Holtz last week?
I think Lincoln Holtz is, and it's probably similar to Devin Brown. I don't think I've talked with Lincoln other than like saying like hello. So I don't want to say like I have a full feel for like his personality, but I am assuming that it is similar to Devin Brown's, and that you are just sort of like, there's a magnetism there that you're drawn to just as like a person. I'm not even talking about a player, but then on top of that, he's like a freaky athlete. So I could see why Ryan Day might become almost instantly enamored with a person and player like that. I don't think that has any bearing whatsoever on this quarterback competition. And I'm not saying like Lincoln Holtz is now in the mix, but I think when you pull a player late in the recruiting cycle like they did, and it's a little bit it's not a reach, but it's a little bit of a shot in the dark, I think. And then that kid shows up and sort of like reinforces what you believed about him. You can't help but be excited about it. So I think that's what it was. I don't think it's anything more than that. But it is a reminder that like when the time comes, and that time is still probably 2 years away from now, Lincoln Holtz is like a serious dude on this roster. He is not just some throwaway guy they wanted to go grab to fill a spot on the roster. He is a kid that they believe can be a starting quarterback here one day.
I thought it was a masterful misdirection for the media that he has figured it out. And he's like, watch this. I'm going to, piece of candy. Dangle out. So you stop talking for a second about Devin Ryan, Kyle McCord. And it's like, well, wait, he's talking about this true freshman quarterback. Let's dive into that. He's very good. He understands how the media works for sure. All right.
Was it the same thing he did with? Was it the same thing with Luke Montgomery when he mentioned his name when he was talking about the tackles?
Yeah, why not? I didn't even actually put them in my 5 questions because we've covered it so much. I did talk about the centers though.
Yeah, I have centers written down here as well. I just think we need clarity, I guess, on like how the addition of Jacob James to this position battle is viewed by the staff, and if it's just like a veteran guy who's been in the program for a while. Like you need that competition, but we're not actually looking at it as like the starting job is up for grabs because we think Carson Hinsman did enough in the spring to get that, or if it is truly wide open. My assumption would have been the latter 2 weeks ago, I still think it's probably a competition, even as we move forward here, given what Ryan Day said last week at Big Ten Media Days about Carson Hinsman. But it's a little bit of a fuzzy picture, I suppose. I would even maybe, perhaps it'd be a waste of a question, but just for the sake of clarity, maybe putting the idea to bed, might float out the idea of Matthew Jones again, just to see what the response is, as Ohio State tries to find that the best 5 offensive linemen. Is that even a consideration, or are they as they were in the spring, content with him and Donovan Jackson sticking at guard and then looking at Carson Hinsman, Jacob James, or Vic Cutler to play the center position? That's probably the case, but I don't think it hurts to ask. But the state of play feels, I don't know, slightly different than it did a week or so ago, given the high praise for Carson Hinsman. But I think Ryan Day maybe will be a little more not effusive in his praise, or for lack of a better word, of Jacob James, but a little more willing to paint that as more of a competition maybe than he did last week.
Yeah, and it's something that I almost feel like we're going to know right away. That Jacob James has had a clean enough bill of health to get through the summer and do workouts and be active in team runs and things like that. And if Justin Fry had seen enough a year ago to say, I think this might be the center of the future, and Luke Whippler talked very highly of Jacob James in the offseason last year. If they go out there on Thursday and Jacob James is snapping to Kyle McCord at the head of one line, like, okay, well, that is a real battle. If Carson Hinsman is already ahead of him and snapping with, let's just say again, Kyle McCord, that seems to be an indication that spring really carried a lot of weight, that would be the direction they want to go. Now, obviously, there's 27 practices after that, and a lot of things can change, health, performance, and otherwise. But I think it will be telling who gets those opportunities on day one, maybe more so than other positions.
Yeah, I think you're right, and also, like, I would throw Vic Cutler into that mix. I've just not really been considering him because I don't know that I saw a guy in the spring who looked like he was ready to be in that position just yet. I when they got him, I thought it was a 2-year project to get him ready to potentially play for them, start for them next year if they need it. I don't know that I looked at him as a plug and play guy, and then seeing it on the field in the spring, I was just kind of reinforcing that idea. But it's been a long time since the end of spring too, and Vic Cutler's had an opportunity to change his body a little bit. I think get stronger. So maybe I am wrong in just assuming that he's not going to be part of that mix and that it's more of a 2-man battle. I guess it could be a 3-man battle, and I think if it can be a 3-man battle, that's better for everybody. That means Vic got better, and that means more competition for Jacob James and Carson Hinsman, and I think ultimately a better process to find the right guy for Ohio State. So I guess we'll see how that plays out. I have a question on the other side of the line too, on the defensive line with the tackles. And I sort of glanced over him when we were talking about when I sort of skipped right to the freshmen when we were talking about guys to watch going into camp, and it's happened a few times for me. I forget that Tywone Malone is on the roster, and which is funny because he was an excellent prospect, and had he been just in Ohio State for the last 2 years, certainly I wouldn't be thinking that way. But maybe it's due to the nature of his arrival that I just sort of pass over him and go right to Jason Moore and Caden McDonald, but. He has the pedigree of a guy who, by this point in his career, should be a pretty good college football player. And I know there's extenuating circumstances there. He played baseball. He wasn't 100% focused on football. He did not play a ton at Ole Miss, even though he played some. So that development arc is probably has been a little slower than it would have been otherwise. But that doesn't mean he can't play for them this year. So I want to get an idea of how they view the potential for him to truly impact the defense this year, or if that's just getting way too far out in front of a guy who has to really dial in and focus on football before that even becomes a question of whether or not he can do that.
Well, we were 2 for 2 up until that point, but my defensive line question was about the Jack and Mitchell Melton, and how he looks physically. That's going to determine whether he can make an impact, and B, if they decide that he is ready and is the guy that they thought they invested 15 months ago, all of that spring, into letting him play that spot, and then it was never the same without him, and Jack Sawyer being not ideally suited for it, all those things that we've beaten to the ground since then. What does he look like? And then as the month goes on, how do they incorporate that into how they use the defensive line and who comes off the field at linebacker. That conversation, I think, is going to be really interesting. And obviously, last year, given the way that worked out, we made too big of a deal out of the jack. And I'm not trying to do that now. I'm trying to figure out if it's a thing that will actually be used so that we know to talk about it or not accordingly in September.
That would be great. I would like to not waste my time in talking about it because I felt like we did that a lot last year. And probably, I guess it could play out that we've already done so over the spring in the last few months, sort of waiting for this to kind of take shape as Mitchell Melton got healthy and cleared and was able to do stuff. Obviously, CJ Hicks is part of that conversation too. I think it is part of the defense. To what extent, I think is the ultimate question. Is it 10% of the time or 30% of the time, as Jim Knowles has said is his goal ultimately, I think, at Ohio State, is to get to use it that much. But yeah, I mean, we talked about Mitchell on the Tuesday show. Like I don't have questions about him so much as like I just want to see it. Like I want to see him running around out there doing stuff because we haven't seen a ton of it yet.
Right.
I just lost my train of thought. What was my other question?
I'll tell you my last two. You said you wanted to know.
Oh, I remembered it. Go ahead. Tell me your last two.
I have a question about Ryan Day and the play calling. I think we've talked about this on other shows dating back to Media Day that he's going to have more fingerprints on this than we might have imagined. And believe it or not, I'm unsure about the safeties and how you use them. But I do think that the one out of that group, for all we talked about, Sonny Styles, Jihad Carter's transfer, you have Lathan in position, Josh Proctor, bonus year. Like, out of that group, I'm probably most curious to see if Jair Brown is second in that line at nickel behind Cam Martinez, and that's the true commitment and direction that they want to go. If they feel like they can't just move Jihad to the other two spots, Bandit or Adjuster, maybe the opportunity is best for him at nickel. Like, the nickel spot, I think, to me, is probably where there's a differentiator that is worth paying attention to, because in my mind, if Josh Proctor can't hold a deep safety spot, then obviously Sonny Styles will play there. That's just where I'm at. But that could be wrong. But I think that that's where the most uncertainty may lie. And it's not because Cam Martinez cannot do it, because I think his spring was probably the best of anybody in that group, at least in terms of production points and interceptions and things of that nature. But if Jair Brown is there, that tells me they feel pretty confident about what they have at nickel, that they don't need Jihad Carter to work there in his return from injury to first practice back with pads on.
Yeah, and I would, along those lines, I would be curious. Like, say they do view Jair Brown that way right now, and he is either, I don't know if he's competing for the starting nickel spot or if he's just a secondary role there and a reserve role, but they're trying him there because they want to get comfortable. Mm-hmm. Is the door still open for him to be an outside corner, a year down the road when like, say they lose Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock, or after 2 years when probably all three of the guys who are starting corners are going to be gone, is Jair Brown, if he's a nickel now, going to be a corner later, or is a switch to nickel like a switch to nickel for good? And I don't know, that could work out well for a Jair Brown. I think like that's a really important position in the NFL now. So if you can flash a little something there in college, I think that's good for your long-term value. But he also, I think he came to Ohio State to play in the tradition of outside corners that have been here. So I would wonder maybe if the immediate view on him changes at all the long-term view on him, or, if not, I think it's fine too. The question that I could not remember, that I remember now, and I'm sometimes I ask questions that I feel like I'm the only one who cares about them, but I don't think I'm alone in wondering what Justin Frye's title of run game coordinator could mean for the offense. And I don't know if in the past that title has meant a whole lot in terms of really putting your fingerprints on the offense. And maybe it won't mean anything now that Justin Frye is doing it. Maybe it just makes sense for the offensive line coach to have that title, as long as it makes sense with the rest of your offensive staff and how you structure it. But I think there's an opening there to change a little bit of what they do running the football. There's times it looks really good, or has looked really good under Ryan Day. There's times where I thought it's been a little stagnant, and I've asked about that, and I've written about it a lot, and we have not really talked about it at all this entire offseason. with Ryan Day or Justin Fry. So that would be a question I have for Ryan Day at some point this month. I don't know if I'll get right into it on the first day of camp, but definitely at some point this month, I want to get into that with him and Justin Fry. Maybe even some of the offensive linemen too, because sometimes the players can shine a little bit more light on that stuff than the coaches are willing to. But is there any way that I don't want to say the run game is changing, but being enhanced probably is the better way to state it as Justin Fry takes on that title.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. We're the big 10,000 foot view is will Ryan Day continue to have a voice on a play in, play out basis? We know that he's going to be intimately involved in the overall plan. How collaborative will it actually be, inside of a game for those 60 minutes on a play by play, snap by snap basis? That I think we may never get an answer to that. They may start answering it the same way that Urban Meyer did, where it's like, Ed and Tim they're going to handle all that. And, but then we knew on third and short that he was calling quarterback power and only one person wanted to dial that up. So,
right.
Maybe we won't ever get a clear answer on that. And that's fine too. Like, however, if it works, it works. If they come up with a collaborative option, cool. If Brian Hartline takes control, awesome. If Justin Fry is dialing up every run play and it's his turn to, push the button and speak into the microphone, whatever. I'm not sure that I have any preference or ideal belief of how Ohio State should do it best, other than the fact that I think Ryan Day offered a reminder in the Peach Bowl that he's one of the very best in football as an offensive mind and a play caller, and him doing nothing would seem like a net negative for Ohio State.
Yeah, I talked about a lot with Doug last week about my conflicted feelings on that, and someone did tweet at me and reminded me that like Ryan Day was really good in the Peach Bowl. He also had a month to prepare for it. Mm-hmm. And I think if you were to hold up the two best games of Ryan Day as a play caller, it was the Sugar Bowl against Clemson and it was the Peach Bowl against Georgia. And in both games, he had a month or 3 weeks or whatever it was to prepare for both of them. Yeah. And that's a valid point. It's well taken. Preparation is one thing, like feel for a game and aggressiveness are another. And I thought that he largely was pressing all the right buttons in the Georgia game. Obviously, the preparation played a part in that. He seemed to really have their number. And he won't be afforded that luxury on a week-to-week basis if he does continue calling plays. But I also think that there was something in the way of like the mentality of how you operate that was rediscovered for him in those games that could benefit him long-term too. It wasn't just the fact that he had weeks of preparation for those games. So the fact that he had a long time, like doesn't change my conflicted feelings, but I did want to mention that because it was a good point.
Sure. Well, we're going to get some answers, hopefully, maybe not to that final question, but some others as Ryan Day and the quarterbacks talk later today, Wednesday, at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. There will be all the coverage you could hope for from the podcast, and then some at ohiostate.rivals.com from us as we get back in there and we get diving into press conference season and then practice on Thursday morning. Can't wait. It's the best time of year. College football is back, and then there will be breaking all of that down on the podcast daily on Thursday morning before we get out to the practice field. It's finally here. For Bill, I'm Austin. Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you later.